The doctors stopped arguing first. They lowered their voices. They exchanged looks meant to soften what could not be softened. In a sealed wing of a private estate guarded like a military compound, Alessandro Romano stood beside a crib that had become the center of his world, and the place where his authority meant nothing. His son Luca had stopped eating. Every option medicine could offer had already been exhausted. Specialists arrived and left. Charts were rewritten. New formulas were tried, then discarded. The machines kept humming, but the child only grew quieter. His cries thinned into fragile sounds that barely reached the walls designed to keep danger out. Alessandro Romano had built an empire by never allowing failure to touch him. Men feared his name. Systems bent around his will. Entire districts answered when he spoke. But there was no command for this. You cannot intimidate a failing body. You cannot threaten time. The house felt it. Corridors once precise became tense. Guards avoided the nursery door. Staff turnover accelerated. Nurses resigned without notice. Something in the estate had shifted from discipline to fear. Fear of what would happen if the child didn't survive. That was when Eliza Moore arrived. She was hired for a reason that had nothing to do with importance. She was quiet, affordable, replaceable. Another maid meant to stay unseen, to clean marble floors and disappear before questions could form. Her dark uniform was immaculate. Her posture careful. Her eyes trained downward, the way people learn when drawing attention is dangerous. But Eliza noticed what others missed. Late into the night, while wiping down a silent hallway outside the nursery, she heard it. Not loud. Not urgent. Just wrong. A broken sound that didn't belong to a healthy infant. A sound that came from exhaustion rather than hunger. Her hand froze against the stone wall. Something inside her tightened. Sharp, instinctive, familiar. A response she hadn't expected to feel again. The kind of reaction you don't think through. The kind your body remembers before your mind catches up. Eliza knew what the doctors didn't. And she knew exactly what it would cost her to say it out loud. When she finally stepped forward, when she crossed a boundary no one had invited her to cross, she didn't bring credentials. She didn't bring medicine. She didn't bring answers that could be written into a report. She offered the one thing the house had lost when Luca's mother died. What happened next didn't just stop a child from slipping away. It changed the balance of power inside that room. It made Eliza impossible to replace. And it marked her as something far more dangerous than a maid. The doctors left one by one. Not all at once, never dramatically, but in the quiet way people retreat when certainty has failed them. A cardiologist lingered too long at the door, fingers worrying the edge of his coat. A neonatologist avoided Alessandro Romano's eyes altogether. They spoke in careful sentences, full of pauses and professional distance, but the meaning settled heavily in the room all the same. Luca was getting weaker. His small body lay in the crib surrounded by soft linens that cost more than most people's rent, yet he looked unbearably fragile within them. His chest rose and fell too slowly, as if even breathing required negotiation. When a nurse tried again with a bottle, Luca turned his head away, lips barely parting. No cry followed. Just a faint sound, thin and worn down, like the echo of something that had already given too much. Alessandro stood beside the crib. His hands clasped behind his back so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He had not slept. His tailored suit hung on him like armor that no longer fit. The room smelled of antiseptic and warm milk and failure. "His organs are under strain," one of the doctors said quietly. "We've ruled out infection. His system just isn't responding." "To what?" Alessandro asked. The doctor hesitated. "To anything." Silence followed. Heavy. Unforgiving. Alessandro had broken men for less than hesitation. He had ruined lives with a phone call, erased threats with a nod. He had built his world on the belief that every problem had a solution, one that could be bought, coerced, or destroyed. This one could not. He reached into the crib and brushed a finger against Luca's tiny hand. It was colder than it should have been. Luca's fingers twitched weakly, curling just enough to remind Alessandro that his son was still there, still fighting in whatever small way he could. "I can get more specialists," Alessandro said, his voice low, controlled. "From anywhere." "We are already beyond that," the doctor replied, softer now. "I'm sorry." "Sorry." The word landed like an insult. After they left, the room felt cavernous. Machines hummed quietly, indifferent. Outside the nursery doors, guards stood at attention, pretending not to hear the sound that slipped through when Luca stirred, a sound that scraped against Alessandro's chest every time. He lowered himself into the chair beside the crib, something he hadn't done since Luca was born. For a long moment, he simply sat there, staring at the child who had undone him. "I don't understand," he murmured, not to anyone in particular. "I gave you everything." Luca did not respond. His breathing stuttered, then steadied again, weaker than before. For the first time in his life, Alessandro Romano had no move left to make. And somewhere beyond the reinforced doors and polished halls, a woman was quietly doing her job, unaware that the moment she heard Luca's failing cry, everything in this house was about to change. Eliza learned the rhythm of the house quickly. It had nothing to do with schedules or instructions. It was in the way footsteps softened near certain doors, in how voices lowered without being told, in the pauses, too long, too careful, that followed any sound from the upper floor. She moved through the estate quietly, cart wheels muted against polished stone, cloth gliding over surfaces that were already spotless. No one spoke to her unless necessary. That suited her. Being unseen was a skill she had learned long before she arrived here. But listening, that came naturally. Late into the evening, as the house settled into a tense imitation of sleep, Eliza worked the corridor outside the nursery wing. The lights were dimmed there, casting long shadows across the walls. Guards stood farther down the hall, giving the reinforced doors a respectful distance, as if even proximity might disturb whatever fragile balance remained inside. She was wiping down a marble ledge when she heard it. Not a cry. Not really. It was a sound that slipped through the quiet like a breath that couldn't quite finish. Even. The kind of sound you might miss if you were busy or tired or trained to focus only on charts and numbers. Eliza straightened slowly. She held still, cloth paused in her hand, and listened again. The sound came once more, softer this time. A small, strained noise that carried exhaustion rather than demand. Her chest tightened. She had heard that sound before. Not here. Not in this house. But somewhere else, in another life she didn't speak about. A memory rose uninvited, sharp and immediate, and she pushed it down with practiced care. Others passed the corridor without stopping. A nurse moved quickly, eyes fixed ahead. A guard glanced at his watch. No one slowed. No one listened. Eliza did. She stepped closer to the door, not touching it, just standing within reach. On the other side, the machines hummed steadily, confident in their own usefulness. Between the hums came the sound again, fainter now, as if even that effort was being rationed. "That's not hunger," Eliza whispered to herself. The words surprised her. She wasn't sure where the certainty came from, only that it settled deep and solid in her bones. Hunger had a shape to it, a strength even in desperation. This sound had none of that. It was what came after hunger had failed. Eliza looked down at her hands. They were steady. That surprised her too. She knew the rules. She had been told them clearly enough. Stay where you are. Do your job. Don't look. Don't speak unless spoken to. She took one step back, then another. Tried to return to her cart. Tried to pretend she hadn't heard anything at all. The sound came again. This time it broke through her defenses. Eliza exhaled slowly and turned toward the door, her heart beating harder now. Not with fear, but with a growing, dangerous resolve. Somewhere upstairs, Alessandro Romano was running out of answers. And she was running out of ways to stay silent. Eliza did not knock. The decision happened before she could reconsider it, before fear could rise high enough to stop her. Her hand lifted, hovered for half a breath, then pressed lightly against the nursery door and pushed. The room beyond was dim, lit only by a low lamp and the steady glow of machines. The air smelled sterile, wrong for a place meant to hold new life. Luca lay in the crib at the center of it all, impossibly small beneath layers of soft blankets. His chest fluttered instead of rising. His face had lost its color. The warmth drained away until he looked like something porcelain left too long in the cold. Eliza took a step inside. "Don't!" a voice snapped from behind her. She turned to find a guard frozen in the doorway. His hand half raised, uncertainty flickering across his face. He hadn't expected resistance from someone like her. Someone quiet. Someone replaceable. "I just need a second," Eliza said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "He's struggling." "That's not your concern," the guard said, sharper now. "Get out." Before Eliza could respond, another presence filled the room. Alessandro Romano stood near the far wall, one hand braced against the window, his back rigid. He looked like a man carved from restraint, every line of him held in place by sheer will. He turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Eliza with immediate, lethal focus. "Who are you?" he said, not a question. "Eliza," she replied. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "I work downstairs. You were told to stay there." "Yes." The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against her chest. Alessandro's eyes flicked past her to the crib, then back again. There was no anger in his expression, only exhaustion edged with something far more dangerous. "Leave," he said. Eliza swallowed. This was the moment she was supposed to disappear, to apologize, to step back into the role that kept her alive. Instead, she took another step forward. "He's not responding because he's weak," she said quietly. "Not sick. Not in pain the way they think." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "Every doctor in this city has already told me what he is." "They're listening to machines," Eliza said. "I listened to him." The guard shifted uneasily. Alessandro didn't look away from her. "You think you know better," he said. "I know that sound," Eliza replied. Her voice wavered then, just enough to reveal the truth beneath it. "It's the sound of a child who's already been hungry too long." For a long moment nothing happened. Then Luca made the sound again, faint, strained, barely there. Alessandro turned toward the crib, his composure cracking just enough for Eliza to see it. "If you're wrong," he said quietly, "you don't walk out of this room." Eliza nodded. She had understood that the moment she crossed the threshold. She moved closer to the crib, her heart pounding, knowing with absolute clarity that whatever she did next would change everything, or end it. Eliza moved with deliberate care, as if sudden motion might shatter what little strength remained in the room. Alessandro watched her closely, every muscle coiled, ready to intervene. The guard hovered near the door, forgotten. The machines continued their steady hum, confident and cold. None of them mattered now. Eliza reached the crib and rested her fingers lightly against Luca's arm. His skin was cool, his body limp in a way that made her breath catch. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. She simply leaned closer, letting him feel warmth first, presence before anything else. "It's all right," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I'm here." Luca's eyelids fluttered. Just once, then again. The change was so small Alessandro almost missed it. Almost. He stepped closer without realizing he had moved, his breath shallow. His attention narrowed to the tiny space between Eliza's hands and his son. Eliza adjusted her position, lifting Luca gently, supporting his head with practiced steadiness. Her movements were quiet, reverent. This was not defiance. It was instinct. For a terrifying second nothing happened. Luca lay against her, still too light, his breathing uneven. The room seemed to hold its breath with him. Alessandro felt the familiar edge of rage claw its way back up his spine, sharp and uncontrollable. Then Luca stirred. A faint sound escaped him, not the broken noise from before, but something stronger. His fingers curled weakly into the fabric at Eliza's shoulder. His mouth moved, searching, responding to something older than fear. Eliza exhaled, a soft, shuddering release she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "There," she murmured. The change was not sudden. It was gradual, almost imperceptible. But it was there. Luca's breathing steadied. His body relaxed, tension easing out of him in slow increments. The color began to return to his cheeks, subtle but undeniable. The machines adjusted their rhythms, reacting to what they could not explain. Alessandro froze. He had watched men die without blinking. He had ordered violence with a calm hand. But this undone him. His chest tightened painfully as he stared at his son, alive in a way he had been afraid to hope for. The room grew quiet. Not the heavy silence from before, but a different kind. A fragile, sacred stillness, as if the walls themselves were afraid to intrude. Luca settled fully now, his breathing deep and even, his small body finally at rest. Eliza looked up slowly. Alessandro met her gaze. Whatever he had intended to say vanished before it reached his lips. The anger, the suspicion, the control, all of it had been pushed aside by something raw and unfamiliar. Oh. For the first time since Luca had been born, Alessandro Romano believed his son might live. And in that moment he understood something else just as clearly. Nothing in this house would ever be the same again. The first thing that changed was the security. Eliza noticed it the next morning when she stepped into the corridor and found 2 guards stationed where there had been none before. They nodded at her. Not politely, not threateningly. Just enough to let her know they were aware of every step she took. The doors that had once been merely heavy now required codes. The nursery wing no longer slept. Luca did. He lay in his crib with a softness to his breathing that felt miraculous. His small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Color had returned to his skin, faint but real. Eliza stood beside him longer than necessary, watching, letting herself believe the worst was behind them. Behind her, Alessandro Romano entered the room without sound. "You don't leave this floor anymore," he said. It wasn't a request. Eliza turned slowly. Alessandro looked composed again. Tailored suit, controlled posture, the familiar armor back in place. But something in his eyes had shifted. Not softer, sharper, focused. "I was just going to get fresh linens," she said. "They'll be brought to you." Eliza felt it then, the subtle tightening around her, like invisible walls moving closer. "I appreciate what you did," Alessandro continued. "You saved my son." "I did what anyone would," Eliza said. Alessandro's gaze held hers. "No," he replied. "You did what no one else could." He gestured toward the crib. "Because of that you stay." The word landed with weight. Eliza's pulse quickened. "Stay here. You sleep in the adjoining room. You eat here. You don't leave the estate without clearance." "That wasn't part of my job," Eliza said carefully. "This is no longer a job," Alessandro said. "It's responsibility." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Luca stirred softly, a small sound of discomfort that immediately drew her attention. Instinct pulled her closer to the crib before she could think. She adjusted the blanket, soothed him until he settled again. When she looked back, Alessandro was watching her, not Luca. "You see," he said quietly. "He needs you." The words should have sounded like gratitude. Instead they felt like a claim. "I didn't agree to be confined," Eliza said. "I didn't agree to give up my life." Alessandro stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You didn't agree to watch a child die either. Yet here we are." The truth of it struck harder than she expected. "I will make sure you are protected," he continued. "Paid well. Taken care of. Anything you need." "And if I say no?" Eliza asked. Alessandro didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Luca, then back to her. "You won't," he said. The certainty in his tone chilled her more than a threat would have. That night, as Eliza lay awake in the small room beside the nursery, listening to Luca breathe through the wall, she understood what had changed. She was no longer invisible. And in Alessandro Romano's world, being needed was just another way of being owned. The house learned her habits before she did. Eliza noticed it in small ways at first. A door unlocking a second too late. A guard appearing at the end of a corridor just as she reached it. The faint click she sometimes heard when she entered the nursery, soft enough to be mistaken for settling walls. She told herself it was coincidence. Luca was thriving. That was what mattered. His appetite returned in gentle increments. His sleep deepening into something peaceful. His cries, when they came at all, were strong now, impatient in the way of healthy infants. Eliza anchored herself to those changes, let them steady her when the rest of the world felt increasingly narrow. But the house was always there, watching. She realized how little freedom she had when she tried to step outside one afternoon, just for air. The sun was out, the first clear day since she'd arrived, and the courtyard beyond the glass doors looked impossibly open. She reached for the handle. "Not today," a voice said calmly behind her. She turned to see one of the guards, not the same one as before. Younger, polite, unyielding. "I just wanted a minute," Eliza said. He nodded as if he understood. "I know." He didn't move. She returned upstairs without another word. At night, the sense of being observed deepened. The nursery lights dimmed automatically. The monitors glowed softly, tracking Luca's breathing, his movement, his sleep. Eliza caught her reflection once in the darkened glass of a screen. Pale, still, framed by numbers and data points. She wondered how much Alessandro saw. She didn't have to wonder long. "You don't sleep much," he said one evening from the doorway. Eliza startled despite herself. She hadn't heard him enter. He stood just inside the threshold, his presence filling the room without sound. "I sleep when Luca does," she replied. "That's not often. He needs consistency. So do you." His gaze drifted, not to her face but to the corner of the ceiling. Eliza followed it before she could stop herself. There was nothing there, but she felt it all the same. "I've increased security," Alessandro said. "Inside and out." "I noticed," Eliza replied. "Good." He paused. "It's for your safety." The words should have reassured her. Instead they settled like a weight. After he left, Eliza sat beside Luca's crib and rested her hand against the smooth wood. Her world had shrunk to this room, this child, this constant awareness of eyes she could not see. She wasn't afraid of Alessandro. Not exactly. She was afraid of how easily the house had closed around her, and how quietly it would stay that way. Alessandro Romano did not enter the nursery often. When he did, it was never for long. He lingered at the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid, as if stepping closer might trigger something he didn't know how to contain. Eliza felt his presence before she saw him, the subtle shift in the air, the quiet authority that bent the room around him. Luca slept peacefully now, his breathing deep and steady. Eliza was seated beside the crib, sorting folded blankets, when Alessandro appeared in the doorway. He didn't announce himself. He never did. "He's stronger," Alessandro said. "Yes," Eliza replied softly. "Every day." He nodded once, as if confirming a report. His eyes stayed on Luca, but his distance from the crib remained unchanged. "You could hold him," Eliza said before she could stop herself. The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Alessandro's jaw tightened. "I don't need to." Eliza watched him carefully. "He knows your voice," she said. "He settles when you're near. That doesn't mean I should touch him." She didn't argue. She had learned that Alessandro's resistance was not loud. It was carved into him, quiet and absolute. "I've buried people I cared about," he continued, his voice low. "I've learned not to believe in things that can be taken." Eliza understood then. This wasn't about fear of harming Luca. It was about fear of loss. "He's already here," she said gently. "Loving him won't make it worse." Alessandro's gaze snapped to hers, sharp and warning. "You think mercy keeps people alive?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It was personal. "In my world," he continued, "mercy is how you get killed. It's how weaknesses are exposed. It's how people you care about become leverage." Eliza stood slowly, lifting Luca from the crib. He stirred, then settled, calm and trusting. She crossed the small space between them and stopped just short of Alessandro's reach. "Then hold him," she said. "Just once." Alessandro stared at the child as if he were a fragile weapon. His hands remained still at his sides, fingers flexing slightly, betraying him. For a moment, Eliza thought he would turn away. Instead, Alessandro reached out. His hands were large, steady despite their hesitation. When Luca was placed into his arms, Alessandro stiffened, every instinct screaming caution. Luca shifted, tiny fingers curling into the fabric of his jacket, and let out a soft, content sound. Something in Alessandro's chest cracked. He looked down at his son, really looked, and for a fleeting second the man who ruled through fear disappeared. What remained was a father staring at proof that something good had survived him. Alessandro swallowed hard and handed Luca back almost immediately, stepping away as if burned. "I can't afford mercy," he said, his voice rough. "Not with what's coming." Eliza watched him retreat to the doorway, his composure already reassembling. But she had seen it, and Alessandro knew it. Vulnerability had touched him, and he didn't trust it to stay. The decision was made without consulting her. Eliza learned about it from the way the house shifted that morning. Voices sharper, footsteps faster, phones ringing and stopping abruptly when she passed. By noon, garment bags lined the hallway outside her room, dark fabric pressed and waiting. Security doubled. Cars arrived and idled, engines humming like restrained impatience. Alessandro found her in the nursery just after Luca finished feeding. "We're leaving this evening," he said. Eliza stilled. "Leaving where?" "A public event," he replied. "Neutral ground." "Necessary." She looked down at Luca, warm and drowsy against her shoulder. The thought of taking him beyond the walls made her chest tighten. "He's still small." "Crowds." "He will be protected," Alessandro interrupted. "More than anywhere else." That wasn't what frightened her. "Why now?" she asked. Alessandro's gaze drifted to the window. Beyond the glass, the estate grounds stretched outward, immaculate and exposed. "Because they're watching," he said. "And silence invites interpretation." She didn't need to ask who they were. By nightfall the transformation was complete. Eliza stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress was elegant, understated, chosen to disappear into refinement rather than announce her presence. Luca was dressed in soft layers, cradled against her with practiced ease. She felt the weight of eyes before they ever left the house. The venue glowed with restrained opulence. Crystal lights, polished stone, conversations layered with meaning beneath every polite word. As Alessandro entered, the room subtly reoriented itself toward him. Heads turned. Smiles formed too quickly. Eliza stayed close. Luca nestled securely against her. She felt the shift immediately. The attention that followed them, the curiosity sharpened by calculation. People noticed the child. They always did. "He looks strong," someone said, voice smooth. "Good to see." Alessandro inclined his head. "He is." The lie was dangerous. Necessary. Eliza felt it settle around them like armor. As they moved through the room, she became aware of how often Alessandro placed himself between her and others. How conversations paused when they approached. How glances lingered just a second too long. "You shouldn't be here," a woman murmured softly as they passed, eyes flicking toward Luca. Not concern. Assessment. Eliza's grip tightened instinctively. Later, as Alessandro spoke with men whose smiles never reached their eyes, Eliza caught fragments of conversation. Ports, contracts, alliances spoken too carefully. She understood then. This wasn't about celebration. It was a message. Luca stirred, unsettled by the noise. Eliza shifted, murmuring softly until he calmed. When she looked up, Alessandro was watching her. Not as a strategist, not as a threat. As a liability. The realization landed quietly, but it stayed. By bringing Luca into the light, Alessandro had invited scrutiny. And by standing beside the child, the first sign came before dawn. Eliza woke to the absence of sound. Not Luca's breathing, that was steady through the wall, but the house itself. No distant footsteps. No murmured voices through the vents. Even the ever-present hum of security felt muted, as if someone had turned the volume down without asking permission. She sat up slowly, every sense alert. The estate never slept this deeply. She crossed into the nursery and stood beside the crib, watching Luca's chest rise and fall. He was warm, peaceful, alive in a way that still felt unreal some mornings. Eliza rested her hand on the edge of the crib, grounding herself. A soft knock came at the door. Not a guard. Alessandro. He looked unchanged at first. Pressed suit, composed posture. But when he stepped inside, Eliza saw it. The tension was different now. Sharper. Purposeful. "They've confirmed it," he said quietly. Confirmed what? That last night wasn't just observation. He met her gaze. It was calculation. Eliza felt the words settle slowly, like sediment sinking to the bottom of clear water. Someone plans to move against you. Alessandro didn't correct her. Against Luca. The truth of it tightened her chest. "They saw what I needed them to see," he continued. "A healthy heir. Stability. They also saw you." Eliza nodded once. She had known this moment was coming. Had felt it since the first camera followed her too closely. Since the first door locked behind her without explanation. "What does that mean for me?" she asked. Alessandro didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the crib, looking down at his son. His voice was lower when he spoke again. "It means you can't leave," he said. "Not ever. Not in the way you imagine." The room felt smaller. "I saved his life," Eliza said, not accusing. "Just stating a fact." "Yes," Alessandro replied. "And now your life is tied to his." The words were not cruel. That was what frightened her. They were practical. Final. "I will protect you," he added. "But protection has boundaries. Your name won't exist outside this house. Your past will be sealed. Your future, curated." Eliza closed her eyes briefly. She thought of streets she would never walk again. Of anonymity she would never reclaim. Of how easily kindness had become leverage. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Alessandro looked at her then. Really looked, and something like regret passed through his eyes. "You won't," he said softly. "Because you love him." Eliza turned back to Luca. His fingers curled around nothing, dreaming. He had no idea what his survival had cost. She understood now. Saving a life didn't end the danger. It decided who would pay for it. Eliza stayed where she was, her hand resting on the crib, knowing with quiet certainty that she had crossed a line she could never step back over. And that survival here came with a price no one escaped.